They found her before dawn, on her knees in the frost, in the mud, in the dark, holding the king's dying son against her chest like she was the last warm thing left in the world. And she had decided, long ago, that she would rather break than let go. She was not supposed to be there. She had no rank, no pack, no name that meant anything in this territory. She was an omega, packless, wandering, the kind of person that wolves like these were trained to look through, not at. And yet, there she was, kneeling in the frost of Bloodmoon Forest at the eastern edge of Stormfang territory, humming a song so soft and old that none of the warriors surrounding her had ever heard it before. They had her in a ring of 6, weapons out, orders ready. None of them moved, because something about the scene made even the hardest of them hesitate, and something felt wrong. Not wrong the way a threat feels wrong. Wrong the way something sacred feels when you stumble into it without knowing. There was blood on her hands, blood on her ribs, blood soaking the cloth beneath the child's small body. And the child, small, pale, still, was pressed against a stranger's chest, fingers loosely curled around hers, like he had reached for something in the dark and found her there. Ronan Ironclaw, the king's most trusted soldier, the man who had faced down rogues and rival alphas without blinking, stopped walking, not because he was afraid, because he did not understand what he was seeing. And then she looked up. Her eyes found his across the frost and the drawn blades, and there was no fear in them, no pleading, no performance, only exhaustion. The deep, more bone-ground exhaustion of someone who has already survived the worst thing that can happen to a person, and keeps being asked to survive more. She pulled the boy closer against her side, and the sound of hoofbeats came from behind them all. The crown caught the first grey light of dawn. That was how everyone always recognized Cassian Stormfang, not by his face, not even by his size, but by the way the light found him first. Alpha King, 28 years old, widower, father, the most feared ruler in all the northern territories. He pulled his horse to a stop at the edge of the circle, and his eyes went directly to the small shape pressed against the stranger's chest. Everything else in the world, the warriors, the weapons, the frost, the dawn, ceased to exist. His jaw went tight. His hand went to his blade. And the girl did not flinch. Nobody gave the order to stand down. Nobody gave the order to fire either. The 6 wolves of Cassian's hunting party stood in their ring, weapons steady, eyes moving between the king and the girl, waiting for someone to tell them what this was. Ronan spoke first. Ronan, step away from the child. Now. She didn't step away. She adjusted her hold on the boy, carefully, slowly, the way you handle something irreplaceable. And she looked at Ronan with those exhausted, fearless eyes. Arya, he is still breathing. If you move me, he won't be. 4 words, that was all. Not a threat, not a bargain. Just a fact, delivered quietly, by someone who had stopped caring whether powerful people believed her. Ronan's eyes dropped to the child again, the boy's chest, barely moving, the faint, though shallow rise and fall of breath that could end at any moment. He had served Cassian Stormfang for 9 years. He had carried orders into war. He had made decisions that cost lives, and he had made peace with that. He did not know how to make peace with this. The blood on her hands, the blood on her side, the way the child's fingers curled around hers. His mind made the easy conclusion, the obvious one, the one that required the least thought. Packless Omega, royal heir, bleeding and unconscious, enemy territory. She did this. It was the wrong conclusion. He would know that later. Right now, All he knew was the boy. "Ronan, who are you? What pack are you from?" She looked at him. Something in her expression shifted, not to fear, but to something quieter. The particular stillness of a person who has been asked this question and learned that the honest answer never protects them. "Arya." "I have no pack." 3 words. And in this world, in the law of the North, in the law of every territory she had ever tried to cross, those 3 words were a sentence. No pack meant no protection, no rights, no name that carried any weight. No pack meant she could be removed from this border, from this forest, from this moment, and nothing would stop it. Ronan's grip on his weapon tightened, and then Cassian dismounted. He was taller than she expected, not just his height, though that was real enough, but the way he moved. Like every step was deliberate, like the ground knew who was walking on it. His eyes went to his son first. They always would. And in that moment, watching his face, Arya saw not a king. She saw a father. She saw a man who had already survived losing everything once, and who was standing at the edge of losing it all again, and who was holding himself together through nothing but the sheer force of refusing to come apart in front of his soldiers. He raised his blade at her. She pulled Orion closer. She did not step back. She thought, he can take the blade down, or he can take the child. He cannot do both at once. So she stayed. She breathed. She held on. The blade did not lower, but it did not swing either. For a long, terrible moment, the forest held its breath. The frost held still. The dawn came no further. Just the king, the blade, the girl, and the faint sound of a 5-year-old's ragged breathing between them. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. And somewhere inside Arya's ribs, in the place she had pressed Orion's small head to keep him warm, she felt the slow leak of her own wound spreading, quiet and secret, the pain she had decided could wait. She didn't wince. She didn't let her face change. She just held on. The healer arrived 12 minutes later. Leora Ashenfang moved through the circle of warriors like she had done this before. Because she had. Every battle, every border crossing, every moment when the king's people came home broken and needed to be made whole again. She knelt in the frost beside Arya and the child, and she didn't ask for permission. She simply began. Her hands were steady. Her face was still. But her eyes told a different story, and every warrior watching her knew how to read those eyes. They had hoped, in the way that soldiers hope, or that things might be all right. Leora's eyes said they were not all right. She worked fast. She worked quietly. She turned the child gently and pressed her fingers along the wounds at his small chest, and the silence that followed was the loudest thing in the forest. Arya watched the healer's face and understood. She had understood for a while now since the 2nd hour, when the child's breathing had begun to change. She had carried him anyway, because he was not gone yet. And as long as he was not gone, she would not stop. It was Ronan who worked out the truth first. Not from anything Arya said, from the evidence she had left behind without knowing she was leaving it. The tracks in the mud, stretching back east toward the ridge. A path of 2 feet, hers pressed deep into the ground, the way a person presses who is carrying more than their own weight. The torn feathers caught in Arya's hair. Black-tipped shadowhawk feathers, the kind that only grow on the eastern cliffs. The claw marks on Orion's chest, deep and diagonal, and wrong for any Omega's hands. Too wide, too sharp. The pattern of a rogue, running fast, striking low. Ronan stood very still for a moment. Then he lowered his weapon. He did not do it loudly. He did not make a show of it. He just lowered it. and stared at the ground. Cassian had been watching Arya. He had not looked away from her since he dismounted, watching the stillness in her face, the quiet in her hands, the way she had not once tried to use the child as a shield or a bargain or an escape route. She had simply held him, like it was the only thing she had left to do in the world. He spoke quietly, the way dangerous people speak when they are being careful. "Cassian, where did you find him?" Arya met his eyes. "Arya, East Ridge, just inside the tree line. He was already down when I found him, already cold." A pause. The king's jaw worked. "Cassian, why didn't you leave him?" Arya held his gaze. "Arya, because he was scared, and no one should die scared." Something moved across Cassian's face. It was not soft. It was not warm. It was something far more complicated than either of those things. The particular expression of a man who has built his entire life around a version of strength that does not include this, and who is being asked, right now, to look at this. His grip on the blade loosened. Not much. Just enough. And then Leora stood up, and she took hold of Arya's arm to steady herself, and she stopped. Her hand had found the cloth beneath Arya's ribs, or the cloth that was warm and wet and had been warm and wet for a while now. She pulled the cloth back, very slightly, just enough for the warriors to see. A beat of silence. Then, one by one, the hardest men in the northern territories stopped looking at the Omega like she was a threat. 3 hours. She had been bleeding for 3 hours, through hostile territory, through the cold, through the moment when Ronan had drawn his weapon at her and the king had raised his blade. She had known about the wound the entire time. She had said nothing, done nothing, just kept walking, kept holding, kept putting one foot in front of the other, because there was a child in her arms who was still breathing. The silence that followed was the kind that doesn't know how to end itself. It was at this moment that Darius Shadowcrest, one of Cassian's senior advisors, a wolf who had served on the War Council for 11 years, turned slightly and looked at Arya. Not at her face, at her name, which she had given quietly when Ronan had first asked. Night Whisper. He had heard that name before. He said nothing yet. He turned his face away. He filed it away in the part of his mind where difficult truths went to wait. Leora took Cassian aside. She did not need to take him far. She just needed him to be where the others could not quite hear her. She spoke in the way healers speak when they have learned to carry the weight of what they know, carefully, directly, with no softening in it, because she had learned long ago that false softness only delayed the blow. Cassian didn't react, not outwardly, but not in a way the warriors could see. His face stayed still, his posture stayed straight, his hands at his sides stayed open. He nodded once and walked back. Arya knew, not from what was said. She hadn't heard the words. From the way he walked back. There is a particular way that parents move when they have just been handed the truth they have been trying not to receive, and Cassian Stormfang moved exactly that way, like the ground was slightly less solid than it had been 30 seconds ago. The warriors didn't know what to do with their hands. 6 of the hardest soldiers in the northern territories, men who had held battle lines, carried the wounded from fields, given orders that sent other people into danger, and not one of them knew where to put their hands. Weapons sheathed, heads lowered. Ronan stood with his arms at his sides and his eyes on the ground, and he could not look at the child. Cassian moved toward Orion. The boy had been fading in and out since Arya had brought him down from standing. His eyes had opened twice. Both times they had found, not his father. Both times they had drifted back to Arya. Cassian crouched in the frost beside them, and Orion, in the way of small children, in the wordless deep knowing that lives in their hands, reached, not for his father, for her. Cassian watched his son's hand reach for a stranger's, and something broke in him that he would not be able to name for a long time. Not because it was cruel, because it was not. Because there was nothing cruel about what this Omega had given his son. Because the reaching meant warmth had been found, and safety had been found, and the child had not spent his last hours alone in the cold. Arya took the small hand in both of hers. She began to hum. It was an old song, ancient even, older than the Night Whisper pack, older than the borders that carved these territories into their shapes, a lullaby passed mother to daughter, across generations, across loss, across the long dark winters that had ended packs and dynasties, and left only the song itself behind. It had no words. It didn't need them. The first note cut through the frost like light through smoke, and every wolf in that circle went completely still. Let the humming live here in the script. A beat. 2 beats. 3. The world pauses. Orion's eyes opened. They were glassy, unfocused, the eyes of a child moving between worlds, not fully in either. He looked up at Arya's face, the snow-cold sky above her, the first pale edge of sunrise behind her hair. His lips moved. Orion. Mama. You came back? The whole forest stopped breathing. Arya did not correct him. She did not hesitate. She did not flinch. She simply pulled him closer, pressed her lips to the top of his head, and let the song hold them both. Arya. I'm here, little wolf. I'm right here. Orion's fingers tightened around hers once, the small, fierce grip of a child who has found something worth holding. And then slowly, very slowly, they went loose. His chest rose one more time, fell, did not rise again. Silence. Absolute silence. Hold it. Arya lowered her lips to his forehead, gentle, reverent. A goodbye spoken without a single word. The crown fell. It did not fly. It was not thrown. It made no dramatic arc through the dawn air. It simply slipped from Cassian Stormfang's hands, his hands that had never shaken, that had held blades and treaties and the weight of an entire territory, and landed in the frost with a sound that was small and final and wrong. And then his knees hit the ground, in front of his warriors, in front of the packless Omega, who had just done for his son what he had not been able to do. He went down, and no one moved to help him, because no one knew how. Because there are moments when a person's grief is too large to touch, and all you can do is witness it. Arya sat in the frost with Orion, still held against her heart, and she looked across the small, still body of a boy she had known for 3 hours at the broken king in the mud, and she felt something she did not have a name for yet. Not pity, not triumph, not comfort, or something that lived in the space between one heartbeat and the next, the feeling of standing at the edge of something enormous and knowing, with your whole body, that nothing will ever be entirely the same again. The tears she had been holding for 3 hours fell quietly into the frost. She let them. The healing ward of Stormfang territory smelled of pine and fire and the particular herbs Leora used for deep wounds. Arya had been carried there. She hadn't remembered much of the journey, the blood loss having done what it does. And when she opened her eyes, she was warm for the first time in what felt like years. Leora worked on her side in silence. Arya stared at the ceiling and let her. She thought about the boy, about how small his hands were, about the way he had reached for her. not knowing her, or not needing to know her, just reaching, the way small things reach for warmth. She thought about why that broke her when she had not expected it to. She had spent 3 years not letting things break her. She was not sure when she had decided to stop doing that, but she thought it might have been the moment she heard him crying in the dark, alone at the eastern ridge, and chosen to go toward it instead of away. Outside the door, Cassian stood in the corridor. He had been there for a while. Darius Shadowcrest found him and pulled him aside, the way advisors do when they are about to deliver something that cannot be unsaid. He spoke carefully, directly. Darius. Night Whisper. I've been trying to place it since she said her name. I placed it an hour ago. The Night Whisper Pack. That was the Eastern Border Alliance, 3 years back, of the one the War Council chose to dissolve. A pause. Then, slowly. Cassian. We chose not to defend them. Darius. You signed the order, yes. The Council argued it was necessary. Border consolidation. Protect Stormfang's eastern flank. Another pause. Longer. Cassian. How many survived? Darius. As far as anyone knows. 1. Darius said nothing else. He did not need to. The weight of it came down on Cassian Stormfang, the way snow comes down on a roof, slowly at first, then all at once, and you can feel the exact moment the structure decides whether to hold. He stood in the corridor for a long time after Darius walked away. He did not go in. Not yet. Inside, Ronan appeared in the doorway. He was a large man. He took up most of the frame. He stood there looking uncomfortable in the specific way of soldiers who are accustomed to solving problems with movement and have encountered a problem that movement cannot solve. He walked in. He set a bowl of warm food on the table beside the bed. He set down a cup of water. He did not say a word. He walked back out. Arya watched him go. She understood what that was. Not an apology. He was not yet the kind of man who knew how to say sorry with his mouth. But he was, clearly, the kind of man who could say it with his hands, with a bowl of food set down quietly beside someone he had wronged. She decided to accept it as what it was. She reached for the food. Her hand stopped. On the table beside the bowl, cleaned of mud, I set with a care that felt deliberate, was a crown. Not placed like a gift, not placed like a threat. Placed the way you place something when you don't know what else to do with it. When you have dropped it and someone has cleaned it and you still don't know if you want it back. Arya picked it up. She turned it in her hands. It was heavier than it looked. She thought, this man lost his son today. I lost my family 3 years ago. He signed the order that made me packless. And somewhere in the space between those two facts, between his grief and mine, is a question I don't know how to ask yet. Is a door I don't know whether to open. She set the crown back down. She did not have an answer. Not yet. He came the next morning, alone, no beta, no council member trailing him with notes and protocols, no sword at his hip, and no title announced before him. Just a man, standing in a doorway, wearing the expression of someone who has rehearsed what he wants to say, and discovered, upon arrival, that all of it was wrong. Arya was sitting up in the bed, watching him. She did not offer to make it easier for him. Not out of cruelty. She was simply too tired for that. Too tired to perform comfort for powerful people who arrived at her door, needing something but not quite able to ask for it. She had spent 3 years learning to stop doing that. Cassian came in and stood near the window. He looked at the floor for a moment. He looked at the crown, which was still on the table. He looked at her. Cassian, I came to thank you. He stopped. He appeared to realize, in real time, that those 4 words hadn't said what he needed them to say, and that he did not have better words on hand. Arya almost smiled. Not quite. Arya, you don't have to thank me. I didn't do it for you. He nodded. He had expected something like that. Cassian, where will you go when you are healed? Both of them felt the weight of that question in the room. She had no pack, no territory, no name in any wolf bond that would give her safety or passage or claim. She had nowhere to go. They both knew it. He crossed his arms. He uncrossed them. He walked 2 steps toward the window and stopped. Cassian, I want you to stay. Arya waited. Cassian, the pack has a healing ward. Rooms. You would want for nothing. I owe you a debt I cannot repay. Staying here is the closest I can get to trying. She looked at him. She looked at the set of his jaw, and at the way he said the word debt like it cost him something to even name it, at the stiffness in his shoulders that was not coldness, but something closer to the way a man looks when he is being honest for the first time in a while, and doesn't quite know how to carry it. Arya, a king in debt to a packless Omega. What would your council say? He looked at her directly. Cassian, I stopped caring what my council says somewhere around the time my crown hit the ground. A silence. Then, very slowly, Arya almost smiled again. This time it reached her eyes. Just barely. Just for a moment. She moved to stand. Her legs disagreed. The blood loss had opinions about sudden movement that she had not consulted. Cassian's hand moved before he thought about it. He stepped forward and caught her shoulder. Steadying, firm, but careful. And neither of them stepped back. They stood like that for a moment that was longer than it needed to be. His hand on her shoulder. Her hand braced against his forearm. The distance between them, the exact size of a question neither of them was ready to ask aloud. Something stirred in Cassian that he had not felt in years. Not since Selene. Not since the grief had closed over that part of him like ice over a river, slow and final. It was not passion. Not yet. It was older than that. Quieter. The particular certainty that lives in your bones when something, someone, is suddenly, undeniably significant. His wolf knew it before he did. His wolf had known it since the moment he arrived in the forest and found her kneeling in the frost, refusing to let go. He did not say any of that. He helped her sit back down. He removed his hand. He stood at a proper distance and looked at the window. Arya. All right. He turned. Arya. I'll stay. Not warmly. Not with relief or gratitude or any kind of performance. Just the word, and the thread of something underneath it. Something she was not ready to call hope, but that lived in the same part of her chest where hope used to live. Cassian nodded. He moved toward the door. He paused with his hand on the frame. He did not look back, but the pause said something. It said, I am not indifferent. It said, this matters more than I know how to tell you. It said, I will find better words eventually. He left. Arya sat in the morning light and breathed. 1 week passed. The pack adjusted to her the way water adjusts to a new stone, slowly, finding its way around her, the current shifting without announcement. Wolves who would have stared through her a week ago now stepped aside in corridors. Now nodded. Now found small reasons to be in whatever room she was in, as if proximity to what she had done might mean something, might transfer something, might make them a little more like the person who carries a wounded child 3 hours through the cold and calls it nothing worth mentioning. It unsettled Arya more than the hostility had. She did not know how to be seen. She had spent 3 years learning to be invisible, not performing it, not crafting it, just allowing herself to be less and less, because the world seemed to function more smoothly when she was. And now here was this pack, turning to look at her, and she had no idea what to do with the weight of their attention. On the third day, Thalia Moonraven found her. Selene's younger sister, Orion's aunt, a wolf with grief in her eyes, and nowhere left to put it. And she had found Arya the way grieving people sometimes find strangers, not because they chose to, but because something in the loss was pulling them toward the last person who had been with the one they loved. She was sharp, direct. Arya respected that, even when it hurt. Thalia, you held him like you loved him. You didn't even know him. Arya met her eyes. Arya, no. But he needed someone who would. Thalia stood very still. She looked at Arya for a long moment, the specific look of someone testing whether they are being given a performance or a truth. And then she turned and walked away. Not angry, not closed, just processing, and just a woman holding her grief up against this stranger's honesty, and finding that the two fit together in a way she had not expected. That evening, Cassian found Arya at the edge of the territory. She was looking east. He stopped a few feet away. He stood beside her, not crowding her, not filling the silence with talk. He looked east, too. After a moment, he said, quietly, "Cassian, you're looking at where they were, aren't you?" It was not really a question. Arya nodded. She kept her eyes on the horizon. "Arya, I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer it honestly, even if the honest answer is hard." He went still beside her. "Arya, did you know, when you signed the order, what it would cost the Night Whisper Pack?" A pause. The kind of pause that happens when a person is genuinely deciding, not calculating, not crafting, but deciding who they want to be in this moment. "Cassian, I signed the order. I didn't know your name. I didn't think about names. Arya. I know, that was the problem." Silence. Cassian did not defend himself. He did not explain the council's reasoning, or the strategic necessity, or the impossible choices of a king trying to hold a territory together. He did not reach for any of the words that would have made his decision smaller or more forgivable. He simply stood in the thing he had done. For the first time in his reign, not as a king absorbing consequence, but as a man who had caused another person grief and had no way to undo it. He stood in it without armor. Arya had expected to feel anger. She had carried the shape of it for 3 years, this nameless, faceless political decision that had taken everything from her. And now here was the face. Here was the name. And the anger was still there. It was real and it was hers. But standing beside it now was something else. The exhausting, complicated awareness that the man beside her had lost a son today. That he was standing here, not running from her, not defending himself, but simply standing with her, in the dark, letting her say it. They stood side by side at the territory's edge for a long time, not touching, not quite forgiving, not speaking again. But something shifted in the space between them, something that had been a wall becoming, slowly, imperfectly, a bridge. Two people choosing, very slowly, not to be alone in their grief. The stars came out. Neither of them moved. The memorial was held at the great oak. It was the oldest tree in Stormfang territory. So old that no one alive remembered it being planted. So old that the pack had stopped counting its rings and simply called it the beginning. The whole pack came. Every wolf, every elder, every child old enough to stand at a ceremony. They had not seen their king speak like this before. Not like a commander, not like a ruler, not with the specific formal distance that kings learn to put between themselves and their words, so that no single speech can crack them open in public. He spoke like a father. He spoke about Orion's laughter, about the small carved wolf he had kept on his nightstand, about the way the boy had always insisted on naming every cloud he saw, and the names he chose were never cloud names but always food: the biscuit cloud, the warm soup cloud, the cloud that looked exactly like a berry tart. There was a sound in the crowd that wasn't quite crying and wasn't quite laughter, and it came from every throat at once. Then Cassian turned, and he spoke Arya's name, not quietly, not as a footnote or an acknowledgement or a diplomatic formality. He said it the way you say the name of someone whose actions have changed you, and you want witnesses to know it. Cassian, an Omega named Arya Night Whisper, carried my son through 3 hours of hostile territory in the dark, bleeding from a wound she told no one about. She held him. She sang to him. She gave him the thing I could not get back to him in time to give, a voice that told him he was not alone, that someone was there, that he did not have to be afraid. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full, the fullest silence the great oak had ever held. Cassian looked at Arya. Cassian, she has no pack. She has had no pack for 3 years, because of a decision made in this territory, in my name, before I learned that names matter. That will not stand any longer. He spoke the words into the pack bond. Every wolf felt it. The particular warmth that moves through the bond when a new name is added to it, like a light coming on in a house that has been dark. Cassian, Arya Night Whisper, of Stormfang Pack. The bond settled over her. She felt it the way you feel warmth after a long cold, not like an event, but like a return, like something that had always been true, finally being allowed to be true. Her throat closed. Her eyes burned. She did not look away. Thalia Moonraven moved first. She crossed the grass from where she had been standing near the oak, and she stopped in front of Arya, and she lowered her head. One wolf, then another. Then, quietly, without ceremony, without the drama of a moment, but with the full weight of one, the Stormfang Pack bowed its head to an Omega who had done what none of them could. Let this moment breathe. Don't rush it. Afterward, when the pack had drifted away in small clusters, when the fires had been lit and the voices had softened into evening, Arya stayed. She sat at the base of the great oak with her back against its oldest root and looked at the sky. She heard him come. He sat beside her, not across from her, beside her. He reached into his coat and brought out something small, a carved wolf. It worn smooth at the edges from small hands that had carried it everywhere. He set it in her palm. Cassian, he would have wanted you to have it. He knew you, even if it wasn't long. He knew you. Arya looked at the small carved figure in her hands. The tears came without warning, not the quiet grief tears of the forest, but something different, something that arrived not from loss, but from the opposite of loss, from being seen, from being given something that someone else loved and trusting you to love it too. She didn't wipe them away. She just sat with them, and with the small wolf in her hands, and with the king beside her, who had placed it there and was not moving away. He was close, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him beside her in the cooling evening air. Close enough that when she turned her face toward him, the distance between them was the kind that asks a question. His eyes found hers. He did not look away. Something in him went entirely quiet. Not the quiet of grief, not the quiet of control, the quiet of recognition, of something old and certain settling into its place. His wolf had been patient about it, patient and steady and sure in the way that things are sure when they have no doubts left to work through. And now he looked at this woman, this impossible woman who had walked through 3 hours of darkness, bleeding and afraid, and carrying his son like he was worth everything, and he felt it name itself. He did not say it aloud. Not tonight. Tonight was for grief and for gratitude, and for the slow, careful beginning of things that need to begin slowly to last. But he did not look away. And she did not look away. And the almost that lived in the space between them, the almost that both of them could feel and neither of them tried to name, was enough. For tonight, it was more than enough. A long beat. Then Cassian reaches for his crown, which an attendant has brought and set beside them. He picks it up. He holds it. He looks at it for a moment. An attendant had set the crown beside them, quiet and unannounced. Cassian picked it up. He turned it in his hands, the way Arya had turned it in hers, alone in the healing ward, feeling the impossible weight of everything it represented. He looked at it for a long moment. He looked at her. He did not put it back on. Not tonight. He set it gently on the root of the ancient oak, not thrown, not hidden, not discarded. Set down, deliberately, with full knowledge of what he was doing, and he sat back beside her, and the stars came out over Stormfang territory, brighter than they had been all week, and neither of them needed to speak. A packless Omega walked into enemy territory before dawn. She carried no weapon, no rank, no name that any wolf in those woods would have recognized. She carried only a wounded child and a song, and the decision, made quietly, without witnesses, in the cold dark of the eastern ridge, to be the kind of person who stays. She could not have known what it would cost her. She could not have known that it would also give her something back. She could not have known that the king's crown would hit the frost before his knees did. That 6 of the hardest soldiers in the northern territories would lower their weapons at the sound of a lullaby. That a little boy's last reach would be for her hand. That a man who had stopped believing in warmth would find it again in a healing ward, in a doorway, standing close enough that neither of them stepped back. She did not do it for any of that. She did it because he was scared, and no one should die scared. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, when the world is tired enough to let it happen, the most ordinary act of kindness in the world is enough to bring a crown down. Not in anger, not in war, just in frost, in silence, in the presence of a woman who chose, when the choice was entirely hers, to stay.